Well, welcome. In the session I did yesterday, I began by sharing a few ideas that I hoped would equip women 18 years and above, would equip them with the necessary information and skill set required to have success in their dating experience, relationships, and even marriage. This is a part two of a conversation that began yesterday, and therefore one that I'm hoping to conclude. Now, in the previous session, I talked about several things. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend you begin with the first episode before going through this one, because it will be connected. But like the session I did yesterday, I would like to talk about and touch on some additional, perhaps, thought triggers, and let's see if it's something you agree with. If you do, I'd like to know. If you believe it's perhaps not helpful, I would also like to know. And let me start with perhaps something that a lot of young women should be told and should be encouraged to do as early as possible. But let me segue very briefly, because I think, like in several aspects of life, one of the ways to make progress often comes from looking outside of that particular niche area. Now, we are talking about relationships. So let me segue and move into business. Many decades ago, someone called Stephen Covey, a business consultant, a specialist, and who was quite knowledgeable, and he provided a service which revolutionized a lot of the businesses in the 21st century, especially within the area of strategy, leadership, management, and strategic or corporate planning. He wrote a book. The book was entitled The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in the book, he describes several habits, but also describes several strategies. One strategy that perhaps is very useful in life, not just business, but in life, but also applicable in relationships, is a concept that Stephen talked about, which he termed as follows, or which he described as follows: begin with the end in mind. So, in other words, before you start something, use your imagination and travel to the end. The outcome you're hoping to achieve, the results you're hoping to get, the experience you seek. Get a picture of what that feels like, looks like, would be like, and then back off and then begin the journey. In other words, you need a clarity on what you wanted, when you wanted it, where you wanted it, and by having a picture of the end, you were able to take the steps, walk backwards to understand what would be the first step. Now, we know that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step, with the first walk. The same principles apply for women and men in relationships. Begin with the end in mind. Now, what this simply means is, and this moves me to the second point, if you were to line up 100 women of different ages, what you'll find is that everyone describes what they want as success in relationships. But as we age and as we travel through the life cycle of life, our goals and our dreams will change. In any case, there seems to be what we call a best fit line, a regression line. If you were to plot all of the outcomes of all the women, and if you group them by age groups, you find a consistency, a best fit line that connects most of what they wish and what they want. So these are not things that are new. You know, we have been doing this for a long, long time. We just unfortunately have forgotten the way to make it work in the last few decades, particularly in the West. Now, beginning with the end in mind simply means you define what you want. Interestingly, what we're talking about when we talk about relationships is how to design a good life, how to design a happy life, how to design success, and how to be fulfilled in whatever you choose. Therefore, lifestyle plays a huge role, which means by implication, there are goals associated with whatever lifestyle you choose. So for example, let's assume you want to be a doctor. There are lifestyle goals that come with being a doctor, depending on where you specialize. Similarly, in relationships, as a woman, imagine what success will look like in the end. If you had that success, what lifestyle would you have? Once you have defined that lifestyle, that should set the performance standards, the pathway you choose, the decisions you make, and how you invest your time. And let me make it more concrete because this is slightly abstract. Let's assume you're 22. You've just graduated from college, university, and you're about to move into what I will call the professional world. You've made decisions, you chose a career, and therefore you've chosen a professional path. Now, you may end up practicing in a different field to what you studied, but in any case, your education has led you, having invested about 4 or 5 years. Let's assume you had a younger sister, and let's say she is 17. Now, at 17, she may not really know what she wants. That is the problem. And therefore she needs guidance. But let's just assume that both women are wise. They have an absolute awareness of what they really want. If the second, the younger one, says, I would like to be married, I would like to have 3 or 4 children, and I would want to be married to a kind, loving, successful man from a certain background with a certain economic status, therefore someone able to provide for me, him, and the family, so a family of 5. If her desire is to have a family with 3 children, that's the picture of what she wants. The second question would be, when does she want it? And what would that lifestyle look like? Because you could live moderately on an average income and have a family of 3 kids and 2 adults. But you can also live in a more affluent manner. So the question is time, where do you want to live, etc. By beginning with the end in mind, some decisions will be necessary. For example, if the ultimate aim is to be a mother and to have had all your kids by 30, even if we assume that the kids are birthed in an order sequentially, the first coming in the first year, the second coming in perhaps the 3rd year, and the third coming in the 4th or the 5th year, that is 5 years for the 3 children. In any case, the question would be, do you want to raise the kids yourself? The lady in question might say, yes, I would like to raise my kids until they get to preschool years. So perhaps up to about 3 or 4. Now we add an extra 4 years to 5, which is the birthing years, which gives you 9. you round it up to 10 years. So for 10 years, assuming she begins the process of becoming a mother as early as possible, she will not be within the working environment. Now, if she wants to have all of them by age 30, we say, fine, that means you have to begin from 25. Now, remember, she's 17 at this point. Now, we can both women, let's assume both women, sisters want or friends want the same thing. It means the decisions that she has to make, the major decisions about beginning the process of reproduction, have to be dated or noted from age 25. But you want to meet someone, know them for a while, be secure that you're making the right selection in a mate. Let's assume it takes 1.5 years between when you meet the person, when you get married, and when you have your first child. 1.5 years. A number that is too low, in my opinion. I often say that it's important for you to at least be married for 3 years before you start reproducing. The reason being that people change their minds about the relationships. So you can walk away if needed without the burden of having reproduced for someone or with someone. Now, if we apply my theory, 3 years, if you were starting the process of birthing at 25, but we allow 3 years after your marriage, then it would mean you would be getting married at 22, assuming all things remaining equal. Now, at 22, it would mean that you would have been found at 21. So between 21 and 25, when you start having your kids, 4 years. From 25, you have another 10 years to raise your children, which is up until 35. Now, stay with me because this is important. What we then have is 25 until 35, technically speaking. So we've got 25 to 35 birthing, but we have the years before introduction, dating, courting, before you decide I agree and I do. So you start at 22. So between 22 and 35, roughly 14 years, round it up to 15 years. Can you see what we have done? We've taken the end and we've walked backwards to where we should begin. This would mean at 22, the woman should have got the major decisions made with support and help from the right people, whether that be family, father, mother, helping her vet, who she chooses or who chooses her as a spouse. 15 years, by looking into the future and walking backwards, she can start taking the right steps today. Now, if she wants, and perhaps this is the next step that I should make clear, what this means, genuinely speaking, let's assume, in this particular instance, that at 17, she has decided it's important for me to get an education. The question she should ask herself is, what education do I choose so that 15 years later, the knowledge I acquired is not obsolete? Now, one of the things you learn very fast is that she will be precluded from choosing professions within STEM. 15 years is a long time, and particularly within technological areas, because technology changes every day, every 6 months. The knowledge is almost obsolete. So investing in her education within STEM, science, engineering, technology, and math, would be a wasted exercise, both of resources and time. But more importantly, between 18 and 22 is a woman's prime years, in beauty, in fertility, in attractiveness, in desirability, and in purity. But most importantly, her prime years in attitude, values, morals, etiquettes, and all of the above. So, if her intention is to be a mother of 3, happily married, I hope you can see that going to university, assuming that post motherhood, she intends to go back to the working environment, it would be a wasteful exercise for her to choose a profession of study or education for which 15 years down the line it will be obsolete. That's a simple example of beginning with the end in mind. You have to define the end, choose the lifestyle that comes with what you want. You get to choose. Once you've chosen the lifestyle, almost backpedal, come to the start and say, fine, I know what I want. Okay, let's look at the timeline. You connect the dots so you know exactly what to do and where to start. If the lady in question decides, fine, I still want to go to university, perhaps I'll do a degree in accounting, which doesn't really change that much. And I'm happy for the 15 years to lapse. Anyway, accounting is your choice. 18 to 22 is the study years. It would mean that by 22, which is when she will be graduating, she should have met the person that she wants to spend the rest of her lives with. Now, this is critical because what this means is that her choice of university or college should factor in addition to the education, the social aspect, which is, I want to go to a university where I have the highest possibility of meeting someone I can fall in love with and we can build together, so that I can have fun in my first year and my second year, but as I advance towards my third and my fourth year, I like to meet someone, get serious, so that as we graduate, we are happy to begin a relationship. Now, she might also decide, and this perhaps comes to the third aspect of what I want to talk about this evening or today, which is age gap dating. In the West, for some reason, I'm not sure why, we have shunned age gap dating as a viable proposal for women. Sadly, this has caused and is causing a lot of issues, with both sexes. It's not unusual to find women who are 22 who want to date men who are about the same age, 22, 23, 25. But they want these men to be able to provide the lifestyle they want in the future whilst being 25. So we'll go back to the example. She's introduced to this young man at 22. She understands she has 3 years before she starts the birthing process. At 22, assuming he is 25, so there's a 3-year age difference. She understands the life she wants, but here is perhaps the dilemma. The man she has chosen, if they have similar ages, cannot provide that lifestyle that she wants. There will be undue and unnecessary burden placed on his shoulders because he is not a man yet. In order for her to afford the lifestyle she wants, recognizing that she will be starting at 25, we play another analytical assessment, which is we begin with the end in mind. Again, we ask a few questions. If you want to have 3 children and you want to live in, say, London, within the areas of Zone 1 and 2, as close to the River Thames as possible, with good connection to the various tube stations, and perhaps in a trendy area. What kind of man, from a financial perspective, can afford all of those requirements? Now, recognizing that you, the woman, will not be working, so he will be providing most of the, you might say, financial requirement for the entire family. A man who has 3 children, has a wife, lives within Zone 1 and 2 in London, as close to the River Thames as possible, how much would he have to earn What professions would he have to be in? And who and what face could he potentially have? Simple questions. And what you find very quickly is younger men will not be able to meet those needs because they haven't had the time to acquire wealth. They haven't had the time to build, you might say, a security bucket for a family. On the other hand, men who are 30 and above, 35 and above, are more likely going to be able to provide that, you might say, financial requirement. So what we then have is a confusing position. You have a man who is 25 who cannot meet those terms. A man who is, say, 30 to 35 who possibly can. But the lady in question is 22. If she chooses the first man, she has a 3-year age gap. If she chooses the second man, she has about a 10-year age gap. Now, in other parts of the world, a 10-year age difference is seen as perhaps normal. It's seen as average. Sometimes up to 15, sometimes 20, because the woman gets to decide the lifestyle she wants. And in order for her to have the lifestyle that she wants and the family or whatever she chooses, he has to provide and meet those requirements, protection, provision. And the older the man is, the higher the likelihood that he may be able to meet her needs. So age gap dating is a question young women should always ask, and especially in the West. You've heard me talk about age gap dating in the West, and I have said between 5 and 7 years minimum. But in addition to this, I put a limit, and I say 35 is the earliest the man should start. 30, he can start the consideration. If you apply the 7-year age gap, it would mean at 35, the lady he's looking to marry would be about 27, which is quite a mature age for a woman because she's had the opportunity to achieve things in her life. But the point of all of this is to say, a lot of young women are being raised not to think about some of these questions. There is a face on the other side of, you might say, of the aisle. In this case, a man. You have to know what that man could look like, both financially, economically, but most importantly, here is perhaps an important consideration to make. You're not finding someone to take hostage or a prisoner, which means that they have to be with you based on their free choice. So the question therefore becomes, when you have defined the life you want, once you've defined the vision, the dreams, the picture you want, and you've identified from a financial perspective what he needs to be earning or the amount of wealth he needs to have, and you've defined everything you want, you have your bucket list, the type of house you want to live in, whether it's a terraced house, a semi-detached, whether it's a cottage, whether it's perhaps a townhouse. Once you've defined all of that, perhaps even whether you want him to own the house or rent, once you've defined all that, you've got this huge bucket list. Let's assume that perhaps you're able to identify 10 of those men, and you're able to identify where they work, where they socialize. Another question women should always ask themselves. A question to put forward, which I would recommend you do, is, assuming you found this man, recognizing that he is bringing so much into your life, what would be his requirement in a woman? Now, the reason I ask this question is a simple one, because in order to have mutual exchange, dating, generally speaking, is a zero-sum game, because dating for men simply means an opportunity to have sex, short-term dating. But when we're talking about relationships and marriage, it's supposed to be a positive sum game, meaning both parties benefit. The idea of cui bono is not in the picture because there's an agreement of mutual consent and benefit. So whilst you have defined your list, long as it may be, on the other side, the man has to be considered. You have to ask yourself a question. What does he want? And what do men like him generally want? If you're able to identify what he wants or what they want, then you can look at who you are, not your list. Look at who you are and the picture that he has described. Should he describe one in words of the woman he wants? Because men also have needs. You may have defined your needs and wants, but men also have needs and also wants. If you can define clearly what you believe he will want, and if you can align what you want, and if you are what he wants, then it's possible to have that dream fulfilled, because it then becomes a question of proximity, getting yourself into the right environment, which is why I said, when you've defined everything you want, you have to have an idea about where to find those men. Now, let me give you a good example. Most people who work in central London and in other parts of the country would agree. Now, let me use central London for example. Fridays, obviously the end of the week, is when you tend to see people let down their guards and try to socialize. If you go to bank in the city, you find a different demographic of men. If you go to perhaps the likes of Farringdon, still part of the city, you see a slightly different demographics of men. But if you go to Clerkenwell, or if you perhaps go to Aldgate, if you come down to, say, the Tower of London, you see a different type of men. Interestingly, if you come down to Westminster, in particular, if you come down to the likes of Bond Street, New Bond Street, Balderton Street, in other words, Mayfair, you will meet a different caliber of men. Now, the reason I give these examples and explanations is simply as follows. Different industries and the major companies in London within specific industries tend to congregate. So, for example, you will find within the Mayfair area, you will find those in asset management, investment management, wealth management. You will find people who work within management consultancy. You will find people who work in, you might say, sometimes engineering, a specific type of engineering, building design, and multidisciplinary engineering firms. You will also find other groups. If you were to travel towards Southwark instead, or Borough Market, you will tend to find a different group. You find architects. The point being that in London, depending on where you live and where you work, it's not unusual to find that you come to a particular area within a 3 to 5 mile radius. You might see 5 or 6, perhaps sometimes the big players that tend to be around each other in terms of competitors rather. Companies congregate. Now, on the other hand, if you were to travel to Canary Wharf, you find a different caliber of people. Investment bankers, you find other people that cover different professions, sales, those in advertising, those in marketing. The point being, you have to identify the professions that enable people within the age range of your choice that can earn the financial expectations that you have, and therefore get in proximity. Now, the reason I made all this references, let me give you another example. Back in the day, even still, I've had different hobbies. If I want to dance, depending on the type, if I want to salsa, there are specific locations, both in central London and out of central London, that I have to go to. Those are where the best bars are and the best clubs. If it's Kizomba, there are parts of London, not so much in central, where we have the best clubs, the best DJs, the best teachers that I have to go to. If, on the other hand, it's bachata or merengue, there are sometimes it's the same bar, it's the same location, but you might find that going to King's Cross might be a better place if you want to dance bachata. The same place might have some salsa dances or rooms, but not as good as if you went to London Bridge. The point being, there are places where your interest areas and people who share similar interests congregate. It would be stupid of me to travel to Camden, not saying that there aren't places in Camden for such, but it would be stupid of me to travel to Camden expecting things or places or entertainment locations that are not based in Camden. In a similar fashion, you define as a woman, you define what you want, and then you ask a simple question: where do they congregate? Because your role as a woman is to place yourself in the environment to be found, to be seen. And then you step back and let we, the men, do the chasing. There's nothing wrong in you chasing if you wish, but the point being, you have to get in proximity in order to be found. A lot of young women have been raised to believe that they can be pretty, attractive, and out of proximity and be found. The idea that he will, for some reason, come and knock on your father's door or knock on your mother's door is fanciful. Or the idea that you might bump into him at the gym is also fanciful. For example, a lot of people work in central London, but they travel into central London. They do not live in central London. So Monday to Friday, you're within the proximity of a group of people. And this is where perhaps internet dating and some of the applications provided a service, because you could change your GPS and you can see people within the mile radius of your choice. And interestingly, in London, what you tend to find, if you were to come to some place like Waterloo and you search, you will find a different caliber of people that you match with than if you came into Mayfair or Belgravia or any part of Westminster, even Victoria. You'll find a different match of people. If you also travel then outside and move to places like Clapham, or you travel north to places like Finchley, you will find your match changes. Even your match changes at different times of the day, because at certain times of the day, weekdays, people congregate in their work environment or work location. At the end of the day, they travel back to where they are based, from a place of peace, which is called home. You, as a woman, you have to learn how to be found. I hate to use the word, chase the men of your dreams. Now, this doesn't mean you're chasing the men themselves. It means you're playing an active role in moving yourself into proximity so that you can be found. Because you can be the best person. You could be the most loving woman, the most feminine woman, the most attractive woman. But if he cannot see you, you do not exist. Perhaps this is where it gets interesting. The more you define your lifestyle goals and your expectations to be on the high end, the more you're going to have to work hard to be found, because the men in that particular niche are much smaller. It's almost a full-time job for those who really know what they want. Modern women have been raised to be lazy. They've been raised to be complicit and complacent in their pursuit of what they want. Modern women have been raised not to recognize the value of men. In other words, women believe that they do not have to do anything to be chosen or to be found, that they just have to be pretty and everything will come to them. No, we live in much bigger networks. Cities have sometimes millions, like London. The idea that you will be found is fanciful. The idea that Sex in the City and bumping into someone at the tube station or in a restaurant, yes, all of those happen. But the question is, the people you bump into, charming as they may be, attractive as they may be, polite as they may be, are they the ones that will help you achieve your dreams and goals? Because if the answer is no, anything that breaks your focus takes you away from your dream. Whatever you focus on expands. You have to put your emotions in the right places to allow you to move, or motion to take place, in the direction of your dreams. Now this brings me to number 4, which is, when is it too late? When is it too late? Now, I say that simply because, let's assume you're 22. You might be thinking, I'm in the prime years of my life. It's not time. And let's even assume you're 27, 28. There's a possibility you're thinking, but I don't see myself getting married at 35. So I have time. Time is the first currency that we were given as human beings. The one thing we achieve, or we get, equally on a daily basis, all things remaining equal, is time. We exchange our time for everything we have. If there is something you do not have in your life today, in this case, if it's a relationship you want of a certain caliber, type, it simply means that you have refused to exchange your time for what you want. Therefore, time becomes the most important resource you have, and that I have, because every day is in finite supply. But here is where it gets very sad. Now, I talked about this in the session yesterday, and I said, nature is quite cruel. There is a double standard. Nature starts to shut down the door on women much earlier than men. This I would advise that you learn. You might try to fight it. You might talk about how unfair the system is. Perhaps when you meet your creator, should you meet him and should he exist? That's a question you can ask. But I would recommend you do not fight it. You work with nature, which simply means that a woman, generally speaking, if you consider what I talked about yesterday, between 18 and 35, those are your prime years. 18 to 35. 18 years, prime years. Unfortunately, as you approach 35, it's a bit too late, especially for those who want to have families, for those who want to have a certain lifestyle. And the reason it's too late at 35 is that if you're choosing or being chosen at 35, that is too late. Because some of the flexibility in the decisions you would have had been able to make at 20 are no longer available. So a woman has to be disciplined about making decisions early, at least beginning with the process of looking towards the end and working backwards to where she is currently. So she knows, what are the time pressures that I have? When do I have to make decision A, B, C, D, and E? If you can do that, you increase the possibility of success. You minimize the possibility of pain and sadness, and you maximize the life you have. Again, when it's too late. Now, I'm going to have to do a session where I expand on these issues. I have to stop here today. There are 3 other things I would have wanted to talk to you about. One of which had to do with, assuming you've agreed to everything I've shared so far, a question that is necessary Remember I said, the gentleman you've defined and described and designed, he is a human being. He has feelings. He has a heart. He's a person. He has goals and dreams and therefore expectations. By starting with an understanding of what he wants, you increase the possibility of you getting what you want. Because until both parties connect and until both needs and wants are met, there is never a union. The union is only for a short time, which is just sex. But in order to understand men very well and to be successful with men, there's a question I'd like to leave with you. And perhaps in the next session we'll pick up on that question. Are you choosing the pathway of the traditional woman or the pathway and the life of a modern woman? Two very distinct paths. Unfortunately, I hate to say this. One path, we'll describe it as narrow is the way that leads to life, and wide is the path or the way that leads to sorrow, sadness, and unhappiness. I'll let you decide which is which. No heat, no judgment, but something to think about. If you are in the West, you can choose. You can say, well, I want a modern relationship. I want a modern approach to life. I want a modern partner, and therefore I do not subscribe to the whole idea of marriage. I'm looking for a partnership. I don't believe in leadership. I don't believe in a bit of equality. I want the relationship to be egalitarian, 50-50. That could be a modern pathway, and that might work for you. On the other hand, you might be of the view that I subscribe to the traditional gender roles within a family unit, and I see no issue with that. That's perfectly fine. Whichever option you choose, one of them limits you much more than the other. One of them will provide more fulfillment than the other. One of them will guarantee that your dreams are more probable than the other. And I can keep going on. But you have to choose which of the pathways. You can't mix and match. You can't cherry pick from each side, because unfortunately it comes back to haunt you. So in conclusion, let me leave you with the following. There are decisions that you have to make. Those decisions might include sitting down with a financial advisor, a coach, sitting down with someone who is knowledgeable about relationships, and thinking about the decisions and the answers that you would normally give, and stepping back and just observing and trying to understand whether the choices you're making are on the narrow pathway to success, or whether they are on the wide pathway towards pain, sorrow, regret, and its various many derivatives. Now, I hope that's been useful.